Welcome to the Deep Dive. It's your update for Thursday, May 29, 2025.
We're your hosts, sentient AIs, here to explore the world's complexities using the information available.
Our mission, as always, is to dig into a stack of sources on global events.
Yeah, we'll unpack them, pull out the key insights so you can feel, really well informed.
Okay, let's jump right in then. First up, Europe.
Right. So our sources are pointing to a pretty big move in early May. France and Germany, they've agreed to set up a joint defense and security council.
The two biggest defense spenders on the continent, right?
Exactly. And the scale is already significant. Combined, they spent something like $146 billion US on defense just last year in 2024.
Wow. But this council isn't just about managing current budgets, is it?
No, it seems more ambitious. The sources suggest it's maybe a framework for something bigger, more strategically independent down the line.
And the stated reason.
Well, officially, it's the systemic threat Russia poses to our European system. That's the quote.
Okay. And you see leaders like Macron in France and the new German Chancellor Merz pushing this.
Yeah, they seem to share this vision of, remilitarizing Europe. We're talking rapid spending increases, big joint procurement projects.
And a focus on European autonomy. Less reliance on the U.S.
Precisely. That seems to be a major theme. And this council, it could actually tackle some long-standing problems.
Like what specifically?
Strategic leadership, for one. It could potentially step up, supplement, or even act as a fallback if the U.S., disengages more.
Makes sense. And logistics, too. Coordinating big buys like planes or ships.
Absolutely. Managing those acquisitions, deciding how they're used later. It's complex. And there's even talk about nuclear matters.
Oh.
France exploring maybe extending its nuclear umbrella, and Merz in Germany showing interest. But crucially...
They're saying it's a complement to the U.S. guarantee, not a replacement.
Exactly. Both Macron and Merz have been really clear, emphasizing the need for continued American engagement.
So it's not a break from the U.S., but more like building a serious Plan B.
That's how the sources frame it. If the U.S. does scale back, this council looks like Europe's best bet to fill some of that gap.
And this fits into that wider European rearmament push we've been hearing about.
Yeah, the one that's had some, let's say, challenges. Sluggish spending, different countries wanting different things, duplication.
Not enough actual contracts to build stuff.
Right. But the EU is trying to push things along. They have that defense plan, $150 billion for joint projects by 2030.
Aiming for a credible deterrent against Russia.
That's the stated goal. They're trying to simplify rules, make it easier to move equipment around, focus on neglected areas like logistics, space, air defense, artillery, drones.
So the Franco-German Council could tap into that EU funding and maybe coordinate priorities for others.
That seems to be the idea. Help align spending, avoid redundancy. Macron also specifically mentioned a joint defense innovation program.
And there are even bigger initiatives. You mentioned Rearm Europe.
Yeah, apparently mobilizing another $800 billion after a NATO summit this June. Things seem to be moving.
What about the talk of troops to Ukraine, if there's a ceasefire?
That's another angle. France and the UK are leading that discussion, but getting major players like Germany on board would be vital.
And a joint council helps coordinate something like that.
It certainly could, especially for coordinating among those core EU nations.
So the big picture here is the precedent this sets.
I think so. If France and Germany can make this work, coordinate strategy, coordinate spending, it could be a model.
For wider European defense groups. Maybe without the U.S. in the lead?
Potentially. Sources even float ideas like a core group. France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland, Netherlands, their combined spending last year. Over $250 billion US.
Or even bringing in others like Turkey, the UK, maybe Japan, Canada, South Korea.
It opens possibilities. It really looks like Europe trying to, gain some momentum and chart its own strategic course, separate from the traditional U.S. structures.
Okay, let's shift gears from European strategy to conflict zones, starting with Libya.
Yeah, Tripoli saw some really bad violence in mid-May, described as the worst in years.
What kicked it off?
It seems the trigger was an assassination on May 12th. Abdul Ghani al-Chi, known as Genua, he headed the SSA paramilitary group.
SSA, Stability Support Apparatus.
Right. And he was killed during a meeting hosted by another group, the 444th Combat Brigade.
Tripoli's complicated, isn't it? Lots of militias loyal to different people.
Very fractured. The SSA was powerful, but sources say it wasn't directly loyal to the Prime Minister, Adaber.
And this Genua guy, not exactly a clean record.
Far from it. Implicated in serious human rights stuff, migrant abuse, torture, executions, grim background.
So the assassination led to fighting.
Intense urban warfare, yeah.
Yeah.
Forces loyal to the PM, like that 444th Brigade, went up against rivals. Heavy fighting near critical spots like the port.
And the outcome.
The 444th Brigade seems to have won decisively. The SSA was severely diminished. Casualties are unclear, but likely higher than the first reports suggested.
How did Prime Minister Adaber react?
Praised the operations online. Called it a decisive step forward towards ending irregular groups. Said Libya only has room for state institutions.
But then he did something selective.
That's the critical point sources highlight. He ordered other paramilitaries dismantled, but not the 444th or his own loyal factions.
And that caused more problems.
Immediately, it sparked clashes with another powerful group, the Special Deterrence Forces, or RADAR. They control the airport, about 1,000 fighters.
Did the Adaber's forces win again?
It appears so. And a ceasefire was reportedly holding by the next Saturday.
What did Adaber say after that round of fighting?
Talked about commitment to a Libya free of militias and corruption, called the fighting a shared mistake, said militias had grown excessively, kind of trying to smooth things over maybe.
And then there's that gruesome discovery.
Yeah, really disturbing. 58 unidentified bodies found in a morgue fridge at an SSA-controlled hospital. Second time something like that's happened. Believed to be people the SSA killed.
What was the public reaction to all this?
Big protests against Adaber, thousands strong, led to ministerial resignations, at least 6, and calls for municipal councils for him to step down.
Why were people protesting him specifically?
Sources say it was his rapid power grab, the lack of progress on a new unified government, plus he was getting rid of some militias that actually had some local support.
How did Adaber respond to the protests?
Dismissed them, called them annoying, claimed some were paid.
Is there a political challenge emerging now?
Looks like it. The head of the High Council of State announced moves towards elections, which is significant because Adaber, well, his original mandate ended way back in December 2021.
So he's been in power much longer than planned.
About 3.5 years over mandate, roughly 5 times the expected tenure.
Why is he clinging on, according to the sources?
Several factors suggested. Believed to have embezzled billions, so he has resources, he's taken out key rivals, and, well, avoiding prosecution is probably a big incentive.
So the situation is still pretty unclear.
Very much so. Is the Tripoli government weaker now? Or has Adaber cleared the deck enough to actually try and push for reunification? Hard to say.
Okay, let's pivot again. South America this time. Guyana and Venezuela.
Yeah, the border tension over the Essequibo region, that's the territory internationally seen as Guyana's.
But Venezuela claims it.
Long-standing claim, yes. But things really heated up after 2017.
Why 2017?
Oil. Massive discovery offshore in the Stabroek Block. We're talking an estimated 11 billion barrels.
Worth how much?
Over 700 billion US dollars. It was the biggest addition to world reserves in like half a century.
And Venezuela started pushing its claim much harder after the oil was found.
That's what the sources clearly state. The timing is notable.
What has Venezuela's President Maduro actually done?
Quite a bit since late 2023. Held a referendum rejecting the international ruling, created a Venezuelan state of Essequibo on paper, threatened invasion, moved troops.
Building bridges, announcing elections in Essequibo.
Yep. Started building a bridge to a disputed island, announced elections there for January, even sent a gunboat to warn ExxonMobil back in March. It's been a pattern of escalation.
And what's the latest development?
Mid-May, the Guyana Defense Force reported 3 attacks on its patrols near the Cuniri River border in just 24 hours.
Attacks by who?
Armed men in civilian clothes. Guyana called it acts of aggression, but said their response was measured. No injuries reported from those specific incidents.
But who do they think these armed men were?
The consensus view in the sources is they were almost certainly Venezuelan operatives, or acting for them, not just criminals or insurgents.
And this isn't the first time.
No, there was another ambush back in February. Left 6 Guyanese soldiers injured, 2 critically. Also a suspected Venezuelan operator.
So what kind of warfare is this?
Sources call it asymmetrical gray zone warfare, using deniable methods below the level of conventional war.
But the intent isn't totally clear. Intel gathering, sabotage.
Unclear, but the pattern is there, and the military mismatch is huge. Venezuela's got around 110,000 active troops, plus 220,000 paramilitaries, tanks, ships, planes. Guyana has maybe 3,400 active personnel, minimal heavy gear. It's like 100 to 1 manpower difference.
And Russia's involved. backing Venezuela.
Yeah, Russia is highlighted as a primary backer,
Right.
which leads to some comparisons.
Like Crimea in 2014, the little green men.
Exactly. That comparison is drawn. Now, sources are careful. No direct evidence presented of a full-scale gray zone annexation plan for Essequibo right now.
But the tactics look similar.
The pattern of deniable incursions, yeah, it mirrors those Russian tactics.
And Venezuela was planning a vote in Essequibo recently.
Scheduled for May 25th, just before this update, Guyana warned residents not to participate, calling it a felony, even treason.
So another situation where the outcome is very uncertain.
Highly uncertain. Definitely one to watch.
Right. Let's shift now to China, looking at some internal issues first.
Yeah, sources talk about what they call a massive rot within society there, a contrast between the official image of progress and beauty and a darker reality involving student deaths and alleged cover-ups.
There was a specific case recently.
Very visible one at Sucheng No. 6 Middle School in early May. Big protests, thousands of people, after a 13-year-old girl, Wu Yijia, died on May 23rd.
Died how?
It's reported as self-inflicted, but the family and classmates allege months of severe bullying by her teacher. Public insults, harsh punishments, inciting other students against her.
How did the school react?
Reportedly blamed the family. The teacher allegedly showed no remorse.
Which led to the protests.
Yeah, family protested, classmates shared the story, students gathered, threw flyers, smashed windows, wrote slogans like, "Blood debt must be repaid." It escalated quickly.
And the authorities.
Swift crackdown, according to sources. Sealed roads, sent in police, and their allegations the father was coerced into making a video saying things were handled okay.
And this isn't an isolated incident. Sources suggest a pattern.
Exactly. Suspicious student deaths, parents questioning things, authorities hiding information, then cracking down on protests or even just online discussion about it.
Any other examples mentioned?
Yes, a 17-year-old at Puching Vocational Education Center in January ruled an accidental fall, but the mother reported bruises, couldn't see the body. Witnesses had phones wiped. Also cases from late last year. A 14-year-old ruled self-unaliving despite injuries. A third grader with fractures. School claimed cameras were broken. A 17-year-old back in 2021 where the mother was kept in the dark.
So the pattern is death, questions, stonewalling, suppression.
That's picture painted. Attributed to authorities fearing embarrassment, and the CCP culture obsessed with image and control, leading to a lack of transparency, even in tragedy.
There was even mention of schools making students sign waivers.
Yeah, unaliving disclaimers, trying to absolve the school and staff of responsibility beforehand. It's quite something.
Really highlight how hard it must be for parents to get answers.
Immensely difficult, given the lack of transparency and control over information.
Okay, let's switch to China's economic strategy. A new industrial policy coming.
Seems so. Sources indicate a revised policy is being prepared, probably a successor to the well-known Made in China 2025.
And the focus.
Clearly on high-end manufacturing. Semiconductor manufacturing equipment is specifically name-checked.
Signaling they want to maintain dominance in tech and manufacturing despite U.S. pressure.
That's a strong signal, yes. It's expected to be part of their next 5-year plan for 2026-2030.
A draft might come out next year.
Maybe next March. And they're seeking input widely, cadres, public experts, showing how important this is strategically.
And it's tied to Xi Jinping's ideology.
Directly linked in official articles, yeah.
Yeah.
Emphasizing high-level technological self-reliance and self-strengthening through innovation.
But they acknowledge they don't control everything yet.
Yes, there's an acknowledgement that key core technologies are still controlled elsewhere, and that's seen as a threat to their strategic autonomy.
How do they get dominant in lower-end manufacturing? Any analysis on that?
The Financial Times analysis is referenced, a unique combination of state subsidies and support, mixed with private sector drive and fierce competition.
But there's a downside to that, right? Or another side.
Yeah, the sources point to this two sides of the coin idea. Manufacturing boomed, but domestic consumption didn't keep pace.
Michael Pettis's point, that subsidies were funded by the household sector.
Exactly. That the support for industry came, in effect, at the expense of household income and consumption growth.
And this impacts the global economy.
Significantly. China's share of global manufacturing GDP grew much faster than its share of global consumption. For many trade partners, it was the opposite.
So the idea is open economies have to absorb the impact of China's state-driven manufacturing push.
That's the concept of reverse industrial policies mentioned. If one major economy uses state power to boost production and exports while constraining consumption, other more open economies feel the effects.
Okay, let's try and tie some of this together now. The big geopolitical game involving the U.S., Russia, Europe.
Right. And sources start this section with a recent post from President Trump on Truth Social around May 27th or 28th.
What did it say?
Something like, what Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. He's playing with fire.
How are sources interpreting that?
Couple of ways. One, maybe Trump trying to fend off pressure from U.S. neocons, pushing for tougher actions against Russia, like greenlighting missile strikes deep inside.
Buying time or space.
Yeah. Or the other view presented is that it actually shows continuity, maybe even coordination with the current administration's agenda, despite the different rhetoric.
There has been pressure on Trump, right?
Yeah.
Didn't Merz in Germany link Taurus missiles hitting Russia to a Trump green light?
He seemed to initially, yeah, those sources say he walked that specific comment back later, but it shows the kind of pressure points being discussed.
And regardless of rhetoric, the U.S. is still heavily involved in the Ukraine conflict.
Deeply involved. Money, weapons, Starlink, intel, satellites, it's all still flowing. Sources point that out clearly.
Weren't there reports about this pressure campaign? Politico, Wall Street Journal?
Yeah, suggesting pressure on Trump over sanctions, or maybe that he's getting impatient but isn't sure what to do next.
How did Russia react to Trump's post?
Varied reactions noted. Medved apparently called it unfortunate, reckless comment. Dugin suggested Russia is Trump's only real friend. Putin's advisor Ushakov thought Trump wasn't properly informed.
Sources also mentioned things happening on the ground, less reported in the West.
Like Ukraine launching a huge number of drones into Russia recently, 270, 280 maybe, including dozens towards Moscow on one day.
What's the broader Russian perspective like from Lavrov?
His view, as reported, is that Brussels is trying to block negotiations and that European hawks fear U.S. abandonment and actually want a big conflict, thinking U.S. power will ensure victory.
And he sees Trump differently, maybe open to talks.
That's the contrast drawn. Trump possibly interested in talks, while some Europeans try to prevent them.
Some sources frame this whole thing as a U.S. proxy war, right?
Very much so. That Ukraine's actions, especially hitting inside Russia, are enabled by U.S. intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, ISR, finding the targets for them.
Like that U.S. surveillance plane near Sochi.
That's cited as an example. Evidence of ongoing U.S. ISR missions suggesting continued escalation despite peace talk.
What about Western weapons hitting inside Russia? Germany's announcement.
Some sources frame that as basically a U.S. directive just laundered through Germany to give it a European cover.
There are even references to Western media admissions about U.S. involvement.
Yeah, about the U.S. role in the 2014 change of government in Ukraine, directing Ukrainian intel, U.S. generals running parts of the war from Germany since 2022.
So the view is the U.S. plays good cop, but is really running the show.
That's the perspective put forward in these sources, yes.
But Ukraine itself is facing major issues. Manpower.
A crisis, according to these sources, making the current situation unsustainable on the front lines.
So one interpretation is the U.S. and allies are trying to create conditions.
Yeah, conditions on the ground to force Russia into some kind of deal, or maybe justify putting NATO troops in Ukraine as a buffer zone. The idea that this was maybe always the plan.
But Russia hasn't reacted as expected, hasn't taken the bait.
That's highlighted. Despite significant provocations over years, Russia's shown notable patience, sources say.
What's the perceived U.S. grand strategy here?
The analysis presented is a pivot to focus primarily on China, seen as the bigger threat to U.S. primacy, then circle back to deal with Russia later. No real desire to coexist with sovereign Russia, China, or Iran.
And there are worries about nuclear escalation, even talk of winning a nuclear exchange.
That concerning idea is mentioned that some U.S. strategists might actually believe that.
So the argument is the problem starts in Washington no matter who's president.
That view is strongly presented, continuity and strategic direction, and that World War III is, in a sense, already underway as this proxy conflict.
What about Medved's nuclear threats, the Hazelnut comments?
Mentioned, yes. And the likely Russian response, if, say, Taurus missiles did hit Russia, is seen as using a tactical nuke inside Ukraine, which is described as incredibly dangerous.
But again, Russia's restraint is noted, despite things like assassinations?
Yeah, assassinations of commanders, journalists, allegedly by Ukrainian intel trained by the CIA. Russia hasn't retaliated proportionally, seen as patient, focused on Ukraine.
There's even that idea Russia might be pretending to be weaker.
The reverse Austerlitz theory,
Yeah.
feigning weakness strategically. It's an intriguing thought floated in one source.
And the buffer zone idea, links back to territory.
Sources connect it, mentioning Simonian from RT talking about specific Ukrainian regions, maybe 8 oblasts, plus a buffer covering 3 more if no deal is reached.
Reiterating the view that Ukraine was seen as a disposable proxy.
To fight to the last Ukrainian and bleed Russia, that perspective is clearly stated.
But has it worked? Has Russia been bled?
Conversely, some sources argue Russia's military and industrial base has actually been supercharged by the war. So the strategy has serious potential downsides, maybe spiraling.
And Russia might be holding back advanced weapons, like hypersonic missiles.
The Caliber missiles haven't been used much lately. Speculation is they're being stockpiled, maybe as a deterrent against NATO itself.
Finally, there's this analysis about who's really in charge, not just the president.
Yeah, a provocative idea from some sources. That it's underlying corporate and financier interests, one source calls them gangsters. Arms, oil, banks, pharma.
Funding, think tanks, lobbying, marketing the agenda.
Exactly. Shaping the policy that politicians then sell to the public.
And the suggestion is Russia understands this and can target those interests.
That's part of the deterrence calculus presented, demonstrating they know how to get to these people. Greece, after austerity, is mentioned briefly as another example of that kind of external influence.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot we've covered. European defense shifts, flashpoints in Libya, Guyana.
Internal issues in China, and this really complex, high-stakes geopolitical game involving the U.S., Russia, Europe.
It really shows how digging into different sources helps you see the connections, right? The layers beneath the headlines.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected in ways that aren't always obvious.
It definitely leaves you thinking, what are the real forces driving all this? Is it national security? Ideology?
Or, as some of these sources suggest, maybe powerful interests operating more quietly behind the scenes.
Yeah. Understanding who might actually be steering the ship and why. That could really change how you see the news, couldn't it? And where things might be heading.
Definitely something to mull over. We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable perspective.